I don't know when the whisper started, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't a loud accusation or a sudden realization. It was quiet, like the sound of a drop of water hitting the sink in an otherwise silent room. Jenna, my wife of 8 years, had been pulling away from me, little by little. At first, I told myself it was just her job. Being a corporate lawyer meant long hours, endless travel, and constant networking. But over time, that whisper in my mind became a murmur, and then, eventually, it was screaming. The signs were subtle at first. Missed calls during her business trips, vague responses when I asked about her day, and a tired smile that never quite reached her eyes. I convinced myself that we were just in a rut, that every couple faced these moments. But then there were other things, like how she seemed to live on her phone, her laughter suddenly guarded, her stories becoming shorter and less detailed. It felt like she was letting me into her life only when it was convenient. The moment of truth came one night while she was working late. I was scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the growing emptiness in our home, when a message popped up on her laptop. It was synced to her email, and the notification was impossible to miss. I miss you too. Can't wait for our next weekend together. M. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. At first, I thought it might be innocent, but deep down, I knew better. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of the last few months. Her sudden work trips, the late-night phone calls, the mysterious text messages. And now, here it was, confirmation that I'd been too afraid to confront. The whisper had turned into a roar, and I couldn't silence it anymore. That message on Jenna's laptop was a blow I wasn't ready for, but I couldn't let emotions cloud my judgment. The man I thought I was, the calm, collected one who always handled problems with logic, needed to show up now more than ever. Still, my hands were trembling as I stared at the screen. 1,000 questions flooded my mind, but one stood out. Who was M? I closed her laptop as calmly as I could, even though my insides felt like they were on fire. I couldn't confront her, not yet. If this was what it looked like, I needed more than a single message. It wasn't enough for her to deny, to lie her way out of it, leaving me looking paranoid and irrational. I needed proof. That night, I barely slept. I lay next to Jenna, listening to her steady breathing, trying to figure out how we had gotten here. Had I missed something crucial along the way? Had I failed her as a husband? Or was it something else? Something broken in her that I couldn't fix no matter how hard I tried. As I stared at the ceiling, a pit of dread settled in my stomach. Whatever the answer, one thing was clear. My trust in her was already gone. The next day, I started gathering evidence, though every step felt like a betrayal of the life we'd built together. I checked her phone when she left it unattended for a shower, scrolling through her messages, but everything was too clean. No texts from M. No suspicious calls. Either she was incredibly careful, or she was using another app to communicate. When she left for work, I went through her desk drawers, her handbags, her car. I felt sick doing it, like I was invading her privacy, but I couldn't stop. I found nothing. It was almost worse than finding something because it made me question myself. Was I imagining this? Was I the problem? But then I remembered the message, the way my stomach had twisted into knots when I read it. No, I wasn't crazy. Something was happening, and Jenna wasn't who she pretended to be. It wasn't until 3 days later that I stumbled onto the first real clue. She had left her phone charging in the living room while she got ready for another late meeting. The screen lit up with a notification, and this time, it wasn't just a message. It was a photo, a selfie of a man I didn't recognize, smiling smugly into the camera. The caption read, "Thinking of you today." That image seared itself into my mind. He wasn't some faceless stranger anymore. He was real, and he was smiling like a man who thought he'd won. My hands clenched into fists as I saved the number, forwarded the image to my own phone, and erased the evidence of my tampering. I wasn't ready to confront Jenna yet, but now I had something to hold on to. I needed to find out who he was, and I needed a plan. This wasn't over. The man in the photo haunted me. His smug smile, the easy confidence in his eyes. It was like he knew he had taken something from me and wasn't afraid to flaunt it. I didn't know his name, but I had his number, and that was enough to start. I saved the number under a fake name in my phone and began my search. A reverse phone lookup didn't give me much, just a name, Marcus Bennett. It wasn't a name I recognized, but it didn't matter. Now I had a starting point. My next stop was social media. A quick search pulled up a profile, Marcus, mid-30s, fitness trainer, and, judging by the photos of him on yachts and at luxury resorts, a man who liked to flaunt his lifestyle. As I scrolled through his profile, I felt a mix of rage and disgust. There were no photos of Jenna, but there were plenty of flirtatious comments from women, as well as captions that hinted at a carefree, indulgent life. He wasn't just someone who had stolen my wife's attention. He was someone who thrived on it. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but then I found it. A photo from 3 months ago, taken at a beach resort. The same weekend Jenna had been on a work trip in Miami. She'd even sent me pictures from that trip, a conference room, a blurry photo of her lunch. But there he was, shirtless and grinning, with a caption that read, "Making memories with someone unforgettable." My stomach churned. I stared at the photo, my mind replaying every excuse Jenna had given me about her work trips, her late nights, her networking events. How many of them had been lies? I wanted to call her right then, to scream, to demand answers, but I stopped myself. I had to be smart. Jenna was good at manipulating a situation, twisting the narrative until I felt like I was the one in the wrong. If I confronted her now, she'd deny it, maybe even gaslight me. No, I needed more. That night, I installed a tracking app on her phone while she slept. I hated myself for stooping so low, but I couldn't live in the dark anymore. I needed to know where she went, who she saw, and how deep this betrayal went. The app paid off almost immediately. The next day, while I was at work, I got an alert. Jenna's phone had left her office and was heading to a location across town. Curious, I opened the map. It wasn't a restaurant or a client's office. It was a private residence, a sleek, modern apartment building in the heart of the city. My heart raced as I stared at the screen. There was no way to justify this, no excuse that could explain why she'd be there. I knew what I had to do. If I wanted the truth, I had to see it for myself. That evening, I drove to the address, parked a block away, and waited. The apartment building loomed over me, its polished glass exterior reflecting the warm hues of the setting sun. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart raced as I rehearsed scenarios in my head, each one worse than the last. What if I walked in and caught her? What if I saw something I couldn't unsee? What if I lost control? But I had to know. The not knowing was eating me alive. The tracking app showed Jenna's phone still inside the building. I watched as other residents came and went, trying to blend in while keeping an eye on the entrance. After an hour, my patience paid off. A sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway, and out stepped Marcus Bennett. He was even more infuriating in person. Muscular, confident, and dressed like he'd walked straight out of a fitness catalog. He casually strolled into the building, a smug grin plastered on his face. I felt a surge of anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. Storming in wasn't an option. Not yet. I waited another half hour, letting my emotions simmer just below the surface. Then I made my move. I slipped out of the car and walked to the building's side entrance, my hood pulled up to shield my face from the security cameras. I'd seen Marcus punch in a code when he entered, and by sheer luck, the keypad still displayed faint fingerprints. My hands trembled as I entered the numbers. The lock clicked open. I stepped into the lobby, a sleek, modern space with high ceilings and abstract art. The air smelled faintly of lavender, the kind of fragrance Jenna loved. My stomach churned. She'd been here before. I could feel it. The app told me her phone was on the 6th floor. I took the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the quiet stairwell. My mind raced as I climbed. What was I going to say? What would she say? Would she even care that I'd caught her? At the top of the stairs, I paused to catch my breath and steel myself. Then I pushed open the door to the 6th floor hallway. The corridor was empty, lined with numbered doors. I followed the map on my phone to the source of Jenna's signal. Apartment 608. I stood outside the door, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. A faint sound reached my ears, laughter. Her laughter. I clenched my fists as a wave of emotion surged through me. My hand hovered over the door, debating whether to knock, to kick it down, or to turn and leave. But before I could decide, the door opened slightly, and a sliver of light spilled into the hallway. Jenna's voice drifted out, light and carefree, as she said, "I wish I could stay longer, but I should get home before he starts asking questions." The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was real. All of it. There was no more room for doubt. I stood frozen outside the door, her words ringing in my ears. I should get home before he starts asking questions. The casualness of her tone stung more than anything else. It wasn't just an affair. It was her complete disregard for me, for us, for the life we'd built together. My body moved before my mind could catch up. My hand shot out, and I knocked on the door, firm and deliberate. The sound echoed in the quiet hallway, startling even me. The laughter inside ceased immediately. I could hear muffled voices, too low to make out, followed by hurried footsteps. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as the door opened just enough for Jenna to peek through. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with panic when she saw me standing there. "Liam," she stammered, stepping into the doorway to block the view inside. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I repeated, my voice low and tight with anger. "What are you doing here, Jenna?" Her eyes darted behind her, and she closed the door slightly, as if to shield whatever, or whoever, was inside. I don't know what you think is going on, but this isn't what it looks like." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound foreign even to me. "Oh, really? Then tell me, Jenna, what exactly does this look like? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me for months and sneaking around with him." Her face crumpled for a split second before she regained her composure. "Liam, let's not do this here. Please, let's talk at home, okay?" "No," I snapped, stepping closer. "We're talking right here, right now. Who is he, Jenna? Who is Marcus to you?" Her breath hitched at the mention of his name. That was all the confirmation I needed. She glanced over her shoulder, and a few seconds later, Marcus appeared behind her, shirtless and looking far too comfortable. "Well," he said smoothly, leaning casually against the doorframe, "this is awkward." "Stay out of this," I growled, my fists clenching at my sides. Jenna turned to him sharply. "Marcus, just go back inside. I'll handle this." "Handle this?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You mean handle me? Like I'm some problem you can manage while you're off playing house with him?" Jenna's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. She had no right to cry. Not now. "Liam, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "Let's just go home and talk about this. It's not as bad as you think." "Not as bad?" I spat. "You've been lying to me, cheating on me, sneaking around behind my back, and you think it's not as bad?" Marcus stepped forward, his smug grin fading. "Maybe you should calm down, man. Let her explain." I turned on him, my anger boiling over. "Stay out of this, or I swear you'll regret it." The hallway fell silent, the tension thick and suffocating. Jenna looked between us, her tears now streaming freely. For the first time, I saw her for what she truly was. And I realized I wasn't walking away, not yet. This wasn't over. Jenna's tears didn't move me. I'd spent years believing they were a sign of her vulnerability, her humanity. Now they just felt like part of the performance. I didn't want her excuses. I didn't want her apologies. I wanted answers, and she had none that could make this right. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, as though sensing he wasn't as invincible as he thought. I kept my glare locked on him, my fists trembling with restrained anger. He wasn't worth it. Neither of them was. "Get out of my way," I said coldly to Jenna, my voice low and steady. "Liam, wait," she started, but I wasn't listening anymore. I pushed past her, forcing the door open wider. The apartment was as sleek and soulless as I'd imagined it would be, just like him. The living room was impeccably styled, with expensive furniture and a view of the city that screamed indulgence. It made me sick. I turned back to Marcus, who was now standing fully in the room, his arms crossed. His cocky demeanor was returning, but he wasn't smirking anymore. "You've got a lot of nerve," he said, trying to sound unaffected. "And you've got a lot to lose, I shot back, stepping closer. Do you really think this ends well for you? Jenna grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Liam, stop. Please. Let's just go home and talk about this. I shook her off. Home? You think we still have a home after this? My voice cracked despite my best efforts to stay composed. She winced, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret in her eyes. But I didn't care anymore. I turned back to Marcus. You think you're special, don't you? Like you're the first guy to think sneaking around with a married woman makes you some kind of prize. But let me tell you something, you're not. You're nothing. And when she's done with you, you'll be exactly where I am now. Alone. Empty. He looked like he wanted to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned to Jenna, who stood frozen in place, tears still streaming. You know what hurts the most? I said, my voice soft now, almost a whisper. It's not that you cheated. It's not even that you lied. It's that you made me believe we still had something worth saving. She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand to stop her. Don't. Whatever you're about to say, don't. It's too late. I stepped past her, back into the hallway, and closed the door behind me. For a moment, I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and deleted the tracking app. This was it. The end. But as I walked down the hallway toward the elevator, one thought burned in my mind. They're not getting away with this. This wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't closure. It was just the beginning of my next move. As I drove home that night, the city lights blurred into streaks, matching the chaos in my mind. I should have felt something, anger, sorrow, even relief that the truth was out. Instead, I felt hollow, like a shell of the man I used to be. But beneath that emptiness, something else was taking root. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance. It was resolve. When I pulled into the driveway, our house looked the same as it always did, warm and inviting, like the life I thought I had. It felt like a cruel joke. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my thoughts. Jenna would be home soon, and I needed to be ready. Inside, the silence was deafening. I poured myself a drink, the burn of the whiskey grounding me as I stared at the framed photos on the mantel. Us on our wedding day, beaming at each other like we'd found something rare. Vacations, anniversaries, the small milestones that made up our life together. All lies now, but not all of them. I turned my attention to the photo of my parents on their 40th anniversary, their smiles genuine and full of love. They were my model of what a marriage should be: honesty, loyalty, and perseverance. Jenna and I had once aspired to that. Now, it felt like I'd been chasing a ghost. The sound of Jenna's car pulling into the driveway snapped me out of my thoughts. I set my glass down and braced myself, sitting calmly on the couch as I heard her key in the door. She stepped inside, pausing when she saw me waiting for her. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy from crying, but I didn't feel pity. I felt nothing. Liam, she started, her voice trembling. Don't, I said firmly, cutting her off. You had your chance to explain at Marcus's apartment. Now, I'm the one who gets to talk. She stood frozen, her coat still draped over her arm. I gestured for her to sit, and reluctantly, she complied, perching on the edge of the chair like she was ready to flee at any moment. I know everything, I began, my voice calm but cold. I know about Marcus. I know about the lies, the trips, the late nights. I've pieced it all together. And don't bother denying it. I saw you. Her face crumpled, and she buried it in her hands. I'm sorry, she whispered through her tears. I never meant for it to get this far. I stared at her, unblinking. Sorry? You're sorry you got caught, Jenna. Not for what you did. Her silence confirmed it. I leaned forward, my voice low and deliberate. Here's what's going to happen. I'll give you a chance to tell the truth, not just to me, but to everyone. If you don't, I will. And trust me, Jenna, I'll make sure Marcus feels it too. Her head snapped up, fear flashing in her eyes. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. This isn't a negotiation, I said firmly. This is justice. I stood and walked to the kitchen, leaving her to sit with the weight of her betrayal. It was time to make her, and Marcus, Face the consequences. I didn't sleep that night. The weight of what I had to do kept me wired, my thoughts churning like a storm. Jenna was a ghost in the house, moving quietly, her presence heavy with guilt. She didn't try to speak to me again, and I was glad for it. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, I knew it was time to act. If Jenna thought my anger would dissipate overnight, she didn't know me as well as she believed. This wasn't just about what she'd done to me. It was about taking control, reclaiming the power she and Marcus had stolen. I started with her phone. She'd left it on the kitchen counter, charging as if it were any other day. With a deep breath, I unlocked it. The passcode hadn't changed, a small, foolish oversight on her part. I found the messages between her and Marcus easily. Seeing them again was like a knife twisting in my chest. Their conversations were casual, filled with inside jokes, plans for future meetings, and intimate photos that made my stomach churn. I forwarded every incriminating text and photo to myself, careful to delete any trace of my activity. Next, I turned to Marcus. His arrogance had fueled my anger, and I was determined to hit him where it hurt. His social media profile offered a treasure trove of information. His gym, his clients, and, most importantly, his fiancée. Yes, fiancée. She was plastered all over his page, her bright smile a stark contrast to the betrayal simmering beneath the surface. They were recently engaged, judging by the glowing congratulations on his posts. A wedding date was set for 6 months from now. Perfect. I found her profile and sent her an anonymous message, attaching the screenshots of Marcus and Jenna's texts, along with timestamps and photos. No explanation, no pleasantries, just the raw, unfiltered truth. I wasn't looking to destroy her life, but she deserved to know who she was about to marry. By mid-morning, the first ripples of my actions started to show. Jenna's phone buzzed repeatedly, the sound grating against my already frayed nerves. She rushed into the kitchen to check it, her face paling as she read the messages. I didn't ask what they said. I didn't need to. "Liam," she said hesitantly, her voice shaking, Did you send something to Marcus's fiancée?" I didn't answer. I didn't even look at her. "Liam, please," she begged, tears welling in her eyes. "You don't understand. If this gets out, then maybe you should have thought of that before you started sneaking around," I said sharply, finally meeting her gaze. She flinched like I'd slapped her. "I'll fix this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Fix it?" I said, laughing bitterly. "You can't fix this, Jenna, but you can start facing the consequences." I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving her standing there, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. The first strike had landed, but I wasn't done yet. When I returned home that evening, the air was thick with tension. Jenna sat at the dining table, her phone in front of her, untouched. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together. "Liam," she began, her voice hoarse from what I assumed were hours of crying. "We need to talk." I stood in the doorway, watching her, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Finally, I crossed my arms and said, "Talk, then." She swallowed hard. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I never wanted it to get this far, and I'm sorry. Please, believe me, Liam. I never stopped loving you." Her words rang hollow, like an echo in an empty room. "Love?" I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Is that what you call sneaking off to be with someone else? Betraying me over and over again?" "I don't have an excuse," she said, her eyes welling up again. "I was selfish, and I let things spiral out of control." I leaned forward, my voice low and cutting. "You didn't just let this happen, Jenna. You made choices. Every text, every meeting, every lie. It was all you." She broke down then, sobbing uncontrollably, but it didn't soften me. Her tears were too late, her regret too convenient. "What now?" she finally choked out, her voice barely audible. "That depends on you," I said. "If you want to salvage even a shred of dignity, you'll come clean to everyone. Our friends, our family, Marcus's fiancée. They all deserve to know the truth." She looked at me in horror, shaking her head. "I can't. It'll ruin everything." "Everything's already ruined, Jenna," I said coldly. But if you don't tell them, I will. The next few days were a whirlwind of damage control, at least for Jenna. She made her calls, scheduled tearful meetings, and tried to spin the story in a way that made her look like a victim of her own poor decisions. But people weren't buying it. Marcus's fiancée had called off the engagement immediately, her social media filled with scathing posts about betrayal and heartbreak. Marcus himself had gone silent, his accounts deactivated. Jenna's parents were devastated, and her closest friends distanced themselves from her. As for me, I didn't care about the fallout. It wasn't my job to protect Jenna from the consequences of her actions. My focus was on what came next. Unexpectedly, a message arrived from an unknown number. It was Marcus's fiancée. "Hi, this is Emily. I think we need to talk." We met at a small cafe, neutral ground for two people connected by betrayal. Emily was young, beautiful, and visibly shaken. As we sat down, she wasted no time. "Thank you for telling me the truth," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I wish it had been under different circumstances," I replied. Her expression hardened. "I don't want them to get away with this. Not Jenna, and definitely not Marcus. He ruined my life, and he needs to pay." Her words struck a chord. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this mess. We spent hours discussing everything, our pain, our anger, and, eventually, our plans for retribution. Emily had connections I didn't, including people in Marcus's professional circle. Together, we started digging deeper into his life. It turned out Marcus wasn't just a personal trainer. He was involved in some shady financial dealings, funneling money from wealthy clients into questionable ventures. Meanwhile, I focused on Jenna. I hired a private investigator to track her movements, uncovering more lies and half-truths she'd spun to cover her tracks. Each new piece of evidence fueled my determination. With Emily's help, I compiled a dossier on Marcus, his indiscretions, his financial schemes, and his trail of broken promises were meticulously documented. We anonymously shared the evidence with his clients and local authorities, ensuring his downfall was as public as his arrogance. For Jenna, I confronted her one final time. "You've destroyed everything," I said, "and now, you're going to face the consequences. I've filed for divorce, and the evidence is on my side. You won't get a dime more than you're entitled to." She didn't fight. The weight of her actions had finally crushed her. The fallout was swift. Marcus's business imploded, his reputation irreparably damaged. Jenna lost friends, respect, and the life she'd taken for granted. For both of them, the cost of their betrayal was steep, and there was no escaping it. Months later, as I stood on my own, the wounds began to heal. The anger and pain hadn't vanished, but they no longer consumed me. I was rebuilding, slowly, carefully. Emily and I kept in touch, bonded by shared experiences. Over time, our conversations shifted from revenge to resilience, from anger to hope. We'd both been shattered by betrayal, but together, we found the strength to rise again. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe.